Somewhere in your house, right now, there is a strand of pearls in a box you have not opened in a long while. Maybe it was your mother's. Maybe it belonged to a grandmother you can still picture at the kitchen table. Maybe it was yours once, and you wore it to a wedding in 1974, and it has been sleeping ever since. And somewhere along the way, somebody told you how to test it. They told you to rub it against your teeth. I want to talk to you about that, honestly, before we do anything else. Because the tooth test is the most repeated piece of jewelry advice in this country. It is also the one piece of advice I have quietly come to regret passing along. It does work. It also does harm. And the very best imitations sail straight through it without blinking. So today we are going to do this properly. 10 ways to tell if pearls are real. Counting down to the one that costs you nothing, takes about 5 seconds, and catches the fakes that beat every other test on this list. Not one of these requires you to put a pearl in your mouth. Not one of them requires acid, heat, a flame, or a scratch. Everything here can be done at a kitchen table, in daylight, with a cheap magnifying glass and a little patience. Pour yourself something warm. Get the box. Let's begin. One piece of vocabulary first, because getting this wrong has cost American families real money, and it has cost them in the wrong direction. A natural pearl formed with no human help at all, by pure accident, inside a wild mollusk. They are extraordinarily rare. A cultured pearl formed inside a living mollusk that a human being started off with a tiny implant. An imitation pearl is a manufactured bead with a coating on it, no animal involved. Here is the part people get backwards constantly. A cultured pearl is a real pearl. The nacre is genuine. A living creature laid down every single layer of it. Every gemological authority on Earth classifies it as real. The word cultured tells you how the process began. It tells you nothing about what the material is. I have watched people sell an inherited strand for the price of a tank of gas because somebody at a counter said the word cultured and they heard the word fake. Please do not let that be you. Number 10. Read the strand from across the room before you touch it. Set it down on a plain towel. Step back. Give yourself a moment before your hands get involved, because your hands will lie to you and your eyes will not. A real pearl grew inside an animal with no interest whatsoever in symmetry. Even a beautifully matched strand, hand sorted out of thousands, shows quiet variation when you really look. One pearl a hair larger, one a shade creamier, one sitting a whisper off round. Imitations come off a production line, and a production line does not have bad days. Same size, same shade, same flawless little globe, over and over. So the instinct inverts. Perfection is a warning, not a promise. Now here is something the other videos will not tell you, and it is a lovely little piece of American history. Look at whether the strand is graduated, meaning the pearls grow larger toward the center and taper down toward the clasp, or uniform, meaning they are all roughly the same size. Graduated strands were the American standard for decades. That was the shape of the good necklace a woman received for a wedding or an anniversary through the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and well into the 50s. Uniform strands took over later, as farming got consistent enough to make matching affordable. That does not tell you real or fake, but it tells you roughly when the strand was assembled, and that is the first thread you pull. A graduated strand with an old clasp is telling you it has been in this country a long time, the honest limit. High-grade cultured strands are matched so carefully that variation gets very subtle, and cheap fakes are sometimes made deliberately irregular precisely to fool you. This is a first impression, not a verdict. It tells you where to look harder. Number 9. The two-light test. This one takes 30 seconds and almost nobody does it. Take the strand to a window in daylight. Look at the color. Then carry it to a lamp with an ordinary warm bulb and look again. Then, if you can, step outside into open shade. A real pearl has two colors happening at once. There is body color, the base tone, cream or white or silver or gold, and floating on top of that there is overtone, a faint secondary blush that seems to hover just above the surface, rose or silver or a soft green. The trade calls that shifting quality orient. It moves as you move. It changes character under different light, because the light is going down into translucent layers and coming back out at slightly different angles. A coated bead has one color. It reads essentially the same at the window and under the lamp, because the color is sitting on the outside like paint on a wall. It cannot shift, because there is no depth for it to shift inside of. Try it on the strand you own, then try it on a strand of craft store beads, and you will understand the difference in about a minute. That contrast is the whole lesson, the honest limit. Some very fine imitations are built with layered coatings specifically to fake a little of this. And badly dulled real pearls that have lost their surface can go flat and stop shifting. So a shift is good evidence. No shift is a reason to keep going, not a conviction. Number 8. Luster is not shine, and the difference is the entire pearl market. I want you to sit with this one, because it is the single most valuable thing in this video that has nothing to do with real or fake. Shine is light bouncing off the outside of something. Luster is light going into translucent layers, reflecting from several depths at once and coming back out at you. That is why the old trade saying goes that imitations shine and pearls glow. Here is how you test it, and it is delightfully simple. Hold the pearl near a window in indirect daylight and look for your own reflection in it. On a good pearl, you should see a reflection sharp enough to make out. On the very best, you can see the shape of the window frame. And around that bright reflection, you will often notice a soft halo where the glow bleeds outward into the surrounding surface. On an imitation, the reflection sits flat on the surface like light on a marble. It can be extremely bright, sometimes brighter than the real thing. That is precisely the trap. And underneath luster sits the thing that actually creates it, which is how thick the nacre is. In a cultured pearl, a bead nucleus goes in, and the animal grows nacre over it. How long that animal was left to work decides how thick that layer gets. Thick nacre gives you that deep, wet, almost liquid glow, and it lasts a lifetime. Thin nacre looks chalky and slightly glassy, wears through within a few years of regular wear, and can eventually let the bead underneath begin to show. You cannot measure nacre thickness with your eye, but you can read its symptom, because luster is what nacre thickness produces. Chalky, shallow, dull. That is a pearl telling you the layer is thin. The honest limit, and this one matters. Poor quality real pearls with thin nacre also look chalky, so weak luster does not prove fake, but weak luster always means low value. Number 7. Look for the seam. This one is not in the usual lists, and it is one of my favourites, because it is pure common sense and it catches an enormous number of costume strands in about 10 seconds. Plastic beads are moulded. Moulds come in two halves. Two halves meet at a line. So, on a moulded imitation pearl, there is very often a faint ring running around the bead like a tiny equator, sometimes with a whisper of a ridge, sometimes just a subtle change in how the light runs across that band. You will not see it with your bare eye on a good one. Put a 10 times magnifier on it, turn the bead slowly under a strong light, and watch for that line. Pearls grown inside an animal have no equator. There is no seam because there were no halves. While you are down there, look at the two little openings where the string comes out. On many moulded beads, you will find a slight lip or a rough collar of material around the hole, left over from where the bead was drilled or from where the coating pooled. Real nacre does not pool. The honest limit. Better imitations are tumbled and polished specifically to erase the seam, and glass beads are formed differently and may not show one at all. Finding a seam is close to proof of a moulded bead. Not finding one proves nothing. Number 6. The surface under magnification and what a living animal actually leaves behind. Spend $10 on a jeweler's loop, not 20, 10. It is the single best money you will ever spend on the contents of your own jewelry box, and it will outlive both of us. Nacre is built from thousands upon thousands of microscopic platelets of a mineral called aragonite, laid down in overlapping sheets by a living creature across months and years, with a soft organic binder between the layers. Under 10 times magnification, that structure shows itself as fine, irregular ridges, faint growth lines that wander rather than repeat, tiny dimples, and small, honest imperfections. It looks organic because it is organic. Researchers at the Gemological Institute of America describe exactly this when they examine natural color pearls under the microscope, overlapping nacre platelets with organic material sitting between each layer. Now put an imitation under the same loop. A coating is sprayed or dipped, so it flows and settles evenly. The surface reads uniform, and often faintly glittery in a way that says sparkle rather than glow. There are no overlapping platelets to find, because nothing living ever built it. Here is how to make this test easy on yourself. Find one pearl you already trust, from any source. Put it under the loop one time. That is your reference for the rest of your life. You are not memorizing a definition. You are teaching your eye one picture, the honest limit. This test requires that you know what you are looking at, and there is no shortcut around that except looking. Now, before we get to the top 5, and the top 5 are the ones that will actually settle arguments in your family, let me ask you something small. If you have found even one useful thing so far, tap subscribe. This is American Tool Legends. Every week we sit down together and go through the ordinary things in ordinary American homes. The jewelry, the tools, the china, the boxes in the closet, and we find out what is actually there. It costs you nothing and it keeps this going. And here is the part I say every single week and mean every single time. I am not a certified appraiser, and nothing in this video is an appraisal, an insurance valuation, or legal advice. Every price you hear me mention is a reported result, hedged on purpose, and the market moves. Before you buy, sell, or insure anything of value, check with a certified appraiser and with your own state and local regulations. That last part matters more than people realize, and I will come back to it. Number 5. Turn the clasp over, because it is a signed document. Oh, I love this one. This is the test that requires no skill at all, and I would guess that half the people watching have never done it. Pick up the strand. Turn the clasp so you are looking at the back. Get your light on it and your loop over it. You are looking for 2 things, and either one can change your whole afternoon. First, a purity mark on the metal. 925 means sterling silver. 14K, or the number 585, means 14-karat gold. 18K, or 750, means 18-karat gold. Plat, or the letters PT, mean platinum. A real gold or platinum clasp on a strand tells you that somebody, at some point, believed the contents were worth protecting properly. That is not proof of anything. It is a very strong hint about intent. And while you are there, hold a small magnet near the clasp. Gold, silver, and platinum are not attracted to a magnet. If the clasp jumps, you are looking at plated base metal, and that is a data point about what the whole piece was meant to be. Keep the magnet away from the pearls themselves. You are testing the metal, not the strand. Second, and this is the gift, look for a name, because here is something that would tickle you. The finest imitation pearl strands sold in America very often tell you exactly what they are, in writing, on the back of the necklace, and people simply never turn it over. Marvella, Richelieu, La Tausca, Delta, Mayorita. Those were the great American and European faux pearl houses, sold through good department stores across this country for generations, and their clasps are frequently signed. Majorica clasps often carry their own marks alongside a silver stamp. Now stay with me, because here comes the turn. A signed Marvella or Richelieu strand in lovely condition, hand-knotted, with its original clasp, is a genuinely collectible object. Not a fortune. But it has a name, a following, and a resale market, and it is worth considerably more than a nameless strand of the same beads. The signature is not an insult, it is provenance. So when you find that name stamped in the metal, you have not found bad news, you have found out what you own. Those are 2 completely different feelings. Number 4. The string tells on the strand. Look at the thread between the pearls. Right now, I will wait. A quality pearl strand is knotted, meaning there is one small individual knot tied between every single pearl. That does 2 jobs. It stops the pearls from grinding against each other and wearing away their own nacre, and if the thread ever fails, you lose 1 pearl instead of watching 60 of them roll under the refrigerator. Knotting is slow handwork. Nobody pays a stringer to hand knot a strand of plastic. So knotting is not proof, but it is a strong signal that the original buyer believed the contents deserved the labor. Now look at the very ends, right where the thread enters the clasp. On a well-made strand, you will often see a tiny coil of fine wire, like a miniature spring, sheathing the thread where it loops through the clasp ring. That is called French wire, or gimp. Its entire purpose is to keep the thread from sawing itself apart against the metal. It is a small, unglamorous, expensive detail, and its presence tells you a professional strung this, not a factory. And look at the thread itself. Traditional stringing used silk. Silk ages. It yellows, it goes limp, and after 20 or 30 years it stretches, so the knots start to loosen and you begin to see thread between the pearls where there used to be none. Modern nylon stays white and springy and does not really age that way. which gives you a genuinely useful clue. Aged, discolored, slightly stretched silk with hand knots is telling you this strand has not been touched in decades, and that the pearls in your hand have been sitting exactly as they were when someone you loved last wore them. It is also telling you something practical. If you can see thread between the pearls, it is time to have it restrung. That is a modest cost at any decent jeweler, and it is cheaper than losing pearls one at a time down a heating vent. Number 3. The tooth test, and the honest autopsy of it. Here is the most famous jewelry test in the world, and I am going to give you all of it, because everybody teaches the first half and almost nobody teaches the second. The test. You rub the pearl along the biting edge of your front teeth. A real pearl feels faintly gritty, like very fine sandpaper. An imitation glides, smooth and slippery. The grit is real, and it has a genuine physical cause. You are feeling the microscopic edges between those overlapping aragonite platelets. A poured coating has no platelets, so it has no edges, so it slides. And it works. It is fast, it needs nothing, and it catches the great majority of imitations. Now the half nobody tells you. Pearl nacre sits somewhere around 2.5 to 4.5 on the mineral hardness scale, and softer than that on many gemological references. Tooth enamel sits at roughly 4.5 to 5. Your tooth is harder than most pearls, which means you are not sampling a texture. You are dragging something harder across the softest thing in the jewelry box, and the exact layer you are scratching is the nacre layer that produces the luster you are trying to verify. Do it repeatedly, or do it with pressure, and you are shaving value off the object to find out whether it has any. So here is my position, and I have changed it. Never do this to a pearl that is not yours. Never do this to a fine strand. Never do it to a strand you inherited before it has been looked at properly. And here is the version that costs you nothing at all. Take 2 pearls from the same strand and rub them gently against each other. Real pearls give the same faint, chalky resistance and can leave a trace of fine dust. Imitations slip past each other with no friction whatsoever. Exactly the same information. No teeth. No damage worth mentioning. The other limit is the one that leads us to the top 2. The finest imitations are engineered specifically to defeat surface tests. Some of them are given texture, some of them are weighted. And that brings me to a fact I want you to hear clearly, because it retires a test you have probably been trusting your whole life. You have been told that real pearls feel heavier and cooler than fakes. It was decent advice in 1950. It is nearly useless now. Standard references put real pearl density at roughly 2.6 to 2.85. High-grade imitation pearls, made from glass cores dipped many times over in a pearlescent coating, are deliberately manufactured to land at around 2.7 to 2.8. They are engineered to sit inside the real range. They feel correct in your palm because a factory made certain that they would. The manufacturers know every test in this video. They have known about the heft test for a century. That is the whole reason to stop relying on it. Number 2. The colour at the hole. Now we go somewhere almost nobody looks, and it answers a completely different question. Not fake or real, but treated or natural. And with dark pearls in particular, that question is most of the money. Black and grey and chocolate strands are extremely often dyed. The genuine dark ones, the Tahitian pearls from the black-lipped oyster, are naturally coloured all the way through, because the colour is part of the material the animal deposited. A dyed pearl was coloured from the outside in, usually by soaking, and dye migrates through the soft organic binder between the nacre layers. So here is what to look for. Get your loupe on the drill hole and look at the colour right at the rim, then compare it to the colour out on the open surface of the pearl. On a dyed pearl, the colour very often pools and concentrates at the drill hole, darker there than anywhere else, because that is where the dye entered and where it had the most material to soak into. Look at any blemishes and surface pits too. Dye gathers in low spots. A naturally coloured pearl reads consistently. The drill hole matches the body. There is no darker halo announcing the point of entry. And look for variation across the strand. Real Tahitian pearls have personality. They come in silver, gunmetal, aubergine, and that famous greenish peacock, and no two are quite alike. A strand of uniformly flat, identically jet black beads is usually telling you a vat did that, not an oyster. The honest limit, and it is a real one. Laboratories separate natural colour from treated colour using ultraviolet fluorescence, X-ray fluorescence, and spectroscopy, and even they treat individual observations as screening rather than proof. The drill hole check is a very good screen. It is not a certificate. And I will say plainly that some treatments are now good enough that a home observation cannot catch them at all. And now, number 1. The drill hole edge. The test that costs nothing, takes 5 seconds, and catches the imitations that beat everything else on this list. Every pearl on a strand, and almost every pearl in an earring or a ring, has a hole drilled through it for the thread or the post. Think about what that means for a moment. Everywhere else on that pearl, you are looking at the outside. At the drill hole, and only at the drill hole, you are looking at the edge, a cross-section. The one place on the entire object where the structure is exposed, and structure cannot be argued with. Put your loop right down into the rim of the hole with good light coming in at an angle. On a real pearl, the nacre simply continues down into the hole. The edge is clean and sharp. Along that edge, you can often see the layers themselves, fine concentric rings stacked one on the next, like tree rings in miniature. There is no boundary between an outside and an inside, because from the surface inward, it is all the same material the animal made. On an imitation, there is a boundary, and once you have seen it, you will never miss it again. A thin, darker line where the coating stops and the core begins, chipping and flaking around the rim where the drill broke through the coating. Sometimes the core itself showing plainly, white shell or clear glass or dull plastic sitting behind a thin skin of finish. This is the test that catches the good ones. A coating can be weighted correctly, it can be textured, it can be polished bright enough to fool you across a room, but it is structurally a skin on a core, and at the drill hole that fact is exposed by pure geometry. A coating has an edge, nacre does not. 2 practical notes on running it. On a necklace, check more than one pearl, and start with the ones nearest the clasp, because those are handled most and show wear first. On a worn strand, the thread itself abrades the coating around the holes over the years, so time has already done your work for you. And on earrings or rings, where the hole is hidden in the setting, look right where the post or the cup meets the pearl and bring your light in low and sideways. Now, the third thing the hole tells you, which almost nobody mentions. Look at how wide it is. Very old, very fine pearls were often drilled with remarkably fine holes, because the drilling removed material, and material was value, and the person doing it knew that. Wide, casual, generously drilled holes are the mark of a bead where nobody was counting. And one last thing, said plainly. If a seller will not let you put a loop on the drill hole of a strand they are telling you is genuine, you have your answer, and nobody had to say a word. Now let me give you 3 things the countdown did not have room for. The first is what a laboratory actually does, and the one question none of these 10 tests can answer. Every test in this video separates real pearls from imitations. Not one of them separates natural pearls from cultured pearls, and none of them can, because both are genuine nacre made by a living mollusk. There is no difference in the material. The difference lies entirely in what sits at the center and how it got there. That is a question about the inside, and only a laboratory can see the inside. Nicholas Sturman, who is the Gemological Institute of America's senior manager for pearl identification and has spent over 3 decades doing nothing else, and Chunhui Zhou, a research scientist and manager of pearl identification at the Institute's New York laboratory, work with real-time microradiography and X-ray computed microtomography. In plain English, they take an X-ray and then a 3-dimensional scan, and they read the growth structure inside the pearl the way you would read rings in a stump. A bead nucleus with a thin shell of nacre over it looks nothing like solid, concentric natural growth. So if a strand is being sold to you as natural rather than cultured, and the price reflects that difference, no test in this video verifies that claim. Not one. That claim needs paper from a laboratory, and the gap in value is large enough that the paper is worth every penny. The second thing is a story, and I am telling it because it cuts against everything the internet wants you to believe about inherited pearls. In 1917, on the corner of 5th Avenue and 52nd Street in Manhattan, there stood a marble mansion belonging to a railroad and steamship heir named Morton Plant. His wife, known as Maisie, had fallen for a double strand of natural pearls in the window of Cartier. Pierre Cartier proposed a trade. The necklace against the house. The house was reportedly valued at around $925,000. The necklace was valued at about $1 million. And the trade went through. Cartier has occupied that building ever since. Maisie's portrait still hangs inside it. Now here is the part almost nobody tells you. When her estate was sold at auction in Manhattan in 1957, the necklace came up for sale. Reports of the result vary, and I will hedge it the way it deserves, but the figures generally cited land somewhere in the range of $150,000 to $180,000, against a $1 million valuation 40 years earlier. The building went the other direction entirely. What happened in between was cultured pearls. Farming arrived, supply arrived, and the market for natural pearls fell out from underneath the people holding them. And I tell you that story not to depress you, but to keep you honest, because it is the single best cure for the fantasy these videos can create. Pearls are not a guaranteed store of value. They never were. Most inherited strands in this country are cultured and modest and lovely and worth having exactly for what they are. And here is my contrary opinion, and you are welcome to argue with me about it in the comments. I think the market has the whole thing upside down. Size and roundness are what get priced, because size and roundness are what photograph and what marketing can sell. But of the 7 quality factors the Institute uses to grade pearls, the 2 that actually decide whether a pearl is beautiful in your hand are luster and nacre thickness, and those are 2 ways of describing the same thing. A big, perfectly round pearl with weak luster is a disappointing object. A slightly lopsided pearl that glows from inside is a beautiful one, and it usually costs less. I would take the second one every time. The third thing is a caution, and it is short. Some antique imitation pearls were built as hollow blown glass beads, coated on the inside with a pearlescent extract made from fish scales called essence d'Orient, and then filled with wax to give them convincing weight. That method traces back to a French rosary maker named Jacquin in the 1600s, and it was still in commercial use into the 20th century. If you have an old strand where a bead is cracked and something waxy is visible inside, that is what you are looking at, and it is a genuine antique curiosity rather than a mistake. But some historic imitation coatings also used lead-based compounds as an undercoat. I am not a physician, and I am not going to make a health claim beyond the obvious and sensible one. Do not let a child mouth or chew a vintage faux pearl strand. Do not sand, grind, or file old coated beads. Wash your hands after handling flaking pieces. If you have a real concern about a specific object, ask a conservator or your physician rather than the internet. And one legal note that catches good people out. Old jewelry boxes contain more than pearls. Ivory, tortoiseshell, certain corals, and feathers from protected birds all show up in inherited American jewelry, and all of them are governed by federal and state law that has changed substantially in recent years and continues to change. Before you sell, ship, or even list anything containing those materials, check current federal rules and the rules of your own state. That is not me being cautious for the sake of it. People have gotten into genuine trouble over an inherited hatpin. Now, how do you put all of this together at your own kitchen table? No single test here is proof, and that is not a weakness. That is simply how identification actually works, at every level, including in the laboratory. So stack them. Look at the strand from across the room for that honest variation. Get your loupe onto the surface and hunt for growth structure and for a seam. Turn the clasp over and read the metal and read the name. Then go to the drill hole and look for the edge. If those agree, you have your answer. If they disagree, you have found something genuinely worth carrying to a professional, and that is exactly the point of running them. And when it matters, do the thing I recommend every single week. Take it to a good, independent jeweler and ask them to put it under magnification while you watch. Ask them to show you the drill hole themselves. A jeweler worth your business will do it happily, will tell you honestly when a strand deserves a laboratory rather than an opinion, and will charge you almost nothing for the look. With pearls, that one afternoon is very often the difference between a strand that nobody in the family wanted and the best thing in the box. Now I want to hear from you, and I read every comment on this channel. Tell me what you found. The strand from your grandmother that turned out to be real. The one that turned out to be glass. And honestly, tell me that one too, because those stories help people more than the happy ones do. The clasp that had a name stamped on the back of it the whole time. The dark pendant nobody in the family ever understood. And tell me whether you think I am wrong about luster. Plenty of people in this hobby will tell you size is king. I do not think it is. Argue with me. I would genuinely enjoy it. One last time, because it matters. Nothing here is an appraisal or a legal opinion. Check with a certified appraiser and check your own state and local regulations before you buy, sell, or insure anything of value. A coating has an edge. Nacre does not. Look at the hole, not at the shine. This is American Tool Legends. Thank you for sitting with me today. Take care of yourself, and take care of the things they left you. I will see you in the next one.